Hello, and welcome to another tutorial. This time, we're going to be focusing on low-resolution modeling. We're going to be making this industrial sci-fi shipping container that you see here, and specifically focusing on the modeling and the UV unwrapping of it. We will not be texturing it in this tutorial. We're going to be in Blender for this one. We're going to start out by modeling it. I'll explain the different techniques I use to be able to model this quickly, how to conserve your polygon count, and how to not only UV unwrap your models, but how to pack your UVs such as to maximize the amount of texture space you can use on them. So let's get started. Alright, so here we are in Blender. Now I'm not going to consider this a tutorial on Blender. If you don't know the basics of Blender and how to navigate its interface, this tutorial may not be for you. This is more a tutorial on modeling for games and good modeling practices for games. If you want to learn the basics of Blender, or if you're just new to the program, there are many great resources out there available for you. I will link to some in the description of this video if you want to get started with that, and then maybe come back to this if you're interested in modeling techniques for games. For the asset that we're making, it may seem intuitive to start with a box like this because the end result does look like a box, but that is not the way that we are going to do this. So I will delete this cube, the X key, and I'm going to start with a plane. So Shift A, add a plane. And I'll rotate this 90 degrees to arrange it vertically. That was hitting R to rotate and then Y. So the very first thing when we're making an object is we need to take into consideration the scale. Now the big container here is going to be pretty large. So let's see how big we need to make it in our scene to bring that across. Now every one of these grid units, we're treating that as a meter. When we import this into Unity, that will get converted into 1 meter, to 1 meter square. So I'm going to make this, let's go with 8 meters wide. So I'll scale it in the y-axis by 4, or sorry, 8 meters long. And then we'll make this maybe 4 meters tall. Now the reason why we're starting with a plane here is that we're going to be adding a lot of edge loops to this plane, but we don't want those edge loops to be on the top or in any way representative on the ends. That'll help us save our triangle count. So we're going to start out with this, and I'm going to mirror this to the other side in order to make the two corrugated walls that you often see on shipping containers. Now I could, if I apply a mirror modifier right now, it's not going to do a whole lot of good because our object has no depth to it. Let me delete that. The reason is because the origin point is still in the middle here. We need this to be mirrored across the center of the world. So I'll hit Shift Control Alt C and I'll move the origin to the 3D cursor, which is that little dash circle. Now if I go to my modifiers tab and add in a mirror modifier, oops, still have another problem here, and that problem is that our object does not have a rotation of 0. You'll see it's rotated 90 degrees about the y-axis. That means that the local x, if I change this to local, you'll see local x goes down. We need the local x to go in the same direction as the global x-axis. So I need to apply the rotation. I can do that by hitting Control A, apply rotation, and while I'm here I'm also going to apply the scale so that our scale values are set to 1. So Control A, rotation, and scale. Now if I add a mirror modifier, that's what we're looking for. So now whatever we do to one will be done to the other. So let's add in some of those corrugations. So hit Tab, and then Control R will add in some edge loops. I'll hit it just once, and then click again to set it, and I'll increase the number of cuts to maybe 20? Probably need more than that. I'll go with 28. Let's just go up 40. Okay, now here's how we're going to make those corrugations very easily. I'm going to go to face selection mode, and by the way, that's Control Tab to change your selection mode. Don't worry about these buttons down here. We have hotkeys for those. And then I'll select all of them. You can do that by either hitting the A key or Alt-clicking one of the faces. We'll select all of them in that row. And then I can do what's known as a checker deselect. So select, checker deselect. That'll basically deselect every other face. But I don't quite want it to be every other face. I actually want it to be every third face. And the reason is now I can drag this and you see we get those nice corrugations. If it was every other face, like it was by the default, you see that doesn't really help us because the faces that are not selected are being implicitly moved because their bordering edges have been selected. So when we select every third face, we have some edges that are not selected at all, and that allows us to have these corrugations, although it looks like the wrong one was selected here, so just fix that real quick. Excellent. So that will do it for this particular object. So I'll go to the object panel here and I'll call this one corrugated walls. Now I'm going to make a frame that goes all the way around this. So Shift A. This time I will start out with a cube. Scale it down. Whoops. If you move your cursor off to the side like that, Shift S, cursor to center, will reset it. And also further out than the widest point of the corrugation, so I'll hit 7 to go to the top. I'll hit Z so I can see the wireframe. I'll move this out slightly. There we go. Hit 5 to go back to my perspective view, and then Z again to undo the wireframe. And what I'll do then is I will Shift D to duplicate, and I will negate its Y position. That'll move it all the way to the other side. And then I'll combine those two together to make one mesh. Control J. Then I'll move the origin down to the cursor. And I'll mirror it. And I'll apply that modifier. This will basically bake down the resulting polygons from that modifier into the mesh. Because right now we can only edit one half of this. We need to be able to edit all of it. So I'll apply it. And then I'll put these cubes on the bottom as well. So I'll hit Tab, and with every face selected, if they're not, you can just hit A to select all of them. I'll hit Shift D and then Z to move them down to the bottom. I'll hit 3 on my keyboard in order to make sure that they're staying mostly level. Should do pretty good. And now I have my 8 corners. So now I'll bridge these. So I'll select one face, then the other, and I'll hit W to get to my special tools and bridge edge loops. Even though it says bridge edge loops, this will work even if you have just faces selected. And you'll see it makes a nice little bridge. So I'll go ahead and bridge everything around these corners in order to make my framework.